Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast, long overdue.
I say this all the time. I can't believe we've never covered this, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I do think I know why. So we're going to talk about the Golden State Killer, which is obviously one of the bigger cold cases that's ever been solved in America and solved pretty recently. So I think we discussed it when everything was breaking, and we decided, let's over the next couple of weeks, because there's a lot here, John, and we'll get into this, but yes, he's the Golden State Killer. He was also the East Area Rapist and the Visalia Ransacker. Like, he was several different serial killers or serial rapists over the course of his life in different areas.
We have a lot to cover. So, again, really glad that we're doing this, and it is a brutal case, but I mean, spoiler alert, if you live under a rock, you may not know this, but it has been solved. So
yes. Pretty recently, and we'll get into that. Before we do, I want to give a shout out to Blue-Eyed Farm Girl from Cali, who says, love this podcast. I really enjoy this podcast. It isn't just about crime details, but a look at the details and circumstances that lead to the crimes. Articulate, witty, and full of Southern charm. Keep it coming.
Blue-Eyed Farm Girl from Cali. There's a lot in that name.
Thank you for that 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts. That is maybe the nicest paragraph I've ever heard about us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Blue-Eyed Farm Girl from Cali.
There you go.
I didn't know there were farms in Cali, but apparently there's big milk and cheese producers in Cali, and
a lot of wine country out there, a lot of grape farms, I believe. So yeah, it's a pretty big state, John. I think they're doing a lot of stuff. Doing some good stuff over there.
Well, one of those things was they produced one of the most notorious murderers / rapists in the entire world. So why don't you get the ball rolling and let's talk about that?
Golly, and they produce so many of them. There are so many killers that either start out or end up in California. And today, obviously, we're going to start our dive into one of the worst of them. And this is in the early 1970s, but before you or I were a thing, John. This is in Visalia, California. And at that time, people thought this was a safe place. People weren't locking their doors at the time. Everybody trusted their neighbors. This was like the Mayberry west of the Mississippi. Because of the nice breeze in California, most people left their windows open when they slept at night. So it was really an open community. People felt safe, and one of the most beautiful places in the state. Around that time, about 30,000 people lived there, but in just a matter of a few years, many had come to fear for their safety and question where they lived. Somebody had been breaking into their homes, someone known as the Visalia Ransacker.
The Ransacker first on March 19th, 1974. And in this incident, he stole $70 worth of coins from a piggy bank. And unlike other burglars, the Ransacker did not get in and get out. This was not like a smash and grab. He took his time. He stayed in the home for hours. Instead of taking expensive things, the Ransacker would break in, rifle through the owner's things, scattered women's underclothes, and then took low value items that might mean, something sentimental to the homeowner, not like televisions and VCRs, but like keepsakes, family photos, or even costume jewelry. He would also rearrange or display certain items in the house. In 1 year, the Ransacker broke into 110 homes. Dude, I mean, that's 2 a week, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost one every 3 days just think about the things that you do in your life. You probably go to the grocery store maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. Sometimes you'll maybe plan to go to a particular restaurant every other week. This was 2 to 3 times a week. He was breaking into homes.
Well, but in some ways it's almost worse because there were several days that there were like multiple occurrences in one day. I think at its peak, there were 12 incidents in one day. That was November 30th of 1974. It was almost like a compulsion that just, would urge this person to do this. But on that day in particular, even after doing it, he was thirsty for more.
And his crimes were so personal. Like you said, it wasn't just, I'm coming in to get the valuables and get out, and then I'm going to go take them to the pawn shop and get rich. This was, I'm going to take things that you're going to notice are gone, that are intimate to you. Think about that item. You're going to think about me. And that really makes chills go up my spine. September 11th of the next year, 1975, the ransacker broke into the home of 45-year-old journalism professor Claude Snelling. Now, months before this break-in, Claude had chased a prowler from under his 16-year-old daughter's bedroom window. Again, all this is just making my skin crawl. Very uncomfortable. That September night, Claude woke up at 2 a.m. to strange noises inside his home. He ran out the back door, and it was there that he found a masked intruder trying to kidnap his teenage daughter. The assailant shot Claude twice, punched the daughter, left her on the ground, and fled the scene without being captured. Claude was able to stumble back inside, and he actually passed away from his wounds. And like I said, you and I are both fathers of daughters, John, and this is horrifying. And this is where we start seeing it, which, I mean, they were certain this was the same guy, going from stealing things to trying to steal people.
Well, unfortunately, it gets worse. So in 1976, the ransacker would escalate from burglary to rape. So the crimes went from Visalia to areas of Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Ranch Cordova. All of these places are east of Sacramento. And that is when the Visalia Ransacker became the East Area Rapist. This connection would not be made for decades. So one area of California has a lot of burglaries. It seems like then there's another town east of Sacramento that has an escalation of rapes. They didn't realize these were the same people doing both of these things.
Because it was a different type of crime. There were some similarities that we'll get to, but it was a different thing. It wasn't just robberies. It was somebody who's more violent in their crime. So I totally get this being not making that connection. And like I said, California, they've just generally got a lot going on with criminals most of the time. So they, I don't fault anybody for not picking up on this connection.
So this person would develop their own MO, so to speak. So the East Area Rapist would stalk middle-class neighborhoods at night, searching for women who lived in a one-story home, either alone or with their children, and it would usually be near a creek or a trail or other places that would be easy to hide in. Most of the victims of the East Area Rapist had seen or heard a prowler around their homes before the attacks. So similar to what we just saw, Jamie. Many had even experienced prior break-ins. So is it that this person breaks in, scopes the place, and then comes back for the rape? That's kind of where my mind goes. It was clear that the East Area Rapist would watch neighborhoods closely. He would peep into windows and yards to try to figure out where the next victim lived. Sometimes he called future victims and would hang up so that he could figure out their daily routines. So, back in the day, we had landlines. Your phone number would be posted in a phone book. I could look up your phone number very easily. I could call your home, see if you answered, and if you do, well, then I know that you're likely going to be home around that time. He did his best to know their floor plans, even breaking in to leave pre-tied shoelaces in the home that he would then use after he broke in. He would also disable any weapons that the victim had beforehand. So not even steal them and take them, but he left them to maybe make them feel safe, but they were disabled. That is a whole different level of insane.
And so meticulous. You wonder how people get away with this for so long. A lot of the killers we talk about get caught because they act on impulse or they jump into a situation without being prepared. The East Area Rapist was incredibly prepared in every home that he broke into, and that's why he was able to get away with this for so long. Once he was inside the house, he would shine a bright flashlight in the eyes of his victims to wake them up. So if you've ever been woken up in the middle of the night, you're already disoriented, that light's in your eyes are not adjusted to light, so you're pretty much blind at this point. Then he would take those shoestrings that he had already set aside, tie them up at the wrists and the ankles. A lot of times he would tie them so tight that people said that their hands were numb for up to a full day after the attack. He did not want these people to get away, obviously. He'd also tear up sheets to use as gags, to use as blindfolds. And once the victim, a woman, was subdued, he would rape her. Many victims noted that he stayed in their homes longer than they expected. He would rape these women and then go on to ransack their homes, like we talked about before, looking for an item of meaning to take, looking for a trophy to say, I need to remember this crime. This is what I'm taking back. Not necessarily valuables, but he is also doing things of the Visalia Ransacker here. From June of 1976 to July of 1979, the East Area Rapist committed approximately 50 rapes, averaging 2 rapes a month.
He would always target homes that did not have a man in it, and the media started to pick up on this and would report that. So he changed his MO, and he would move to breaking into homes with couples. So he would break into a home through either a window or a sliding glass door, and then he would wake the couple up with a flashlight and then use the handgun to threaten to kill them. He would make the female victim tie up the male victim, and then he would tie the female up himself. Then the East Area Rapist would separate the couple. He would take the man into another room, make him lie down on his stomach, and then he would stack plates on top of the man's back and eventually tell them, if I hear these plates move, I'll kill her and everyone in this house. I mean, we're going to process more of this later, but my God, like, why not just kill the person?
Yeah.
If you're already doing all this, it's
the psychological power he was exercising over his victims is so scary.
Yeah. And man, this insane. So then he would move the woman into a living room and rape her. And like you said, he would typically, this would not be like 30 minutes in and out. He would typically spend hours in the home, ransacking the place, looking for what he could take, but then also eating their food, drinking their beer, and raping the woman several times. He had cased this place or these places so much, it almost appears as if he thinks he's a member of the household. Like this is his house. He's going to drink the beer and eat the food and rape the women. And this is his castle. You're just living in it.
Absolutely. And you and I have spoke about it before. Just getting your home broken into, you feel so violated and so vulnerable. And obviously he's doing much more awful, violent things to these people. But inside their home, he's not just breaking in and leaving. He is making himself at home. John, we've talked about before, if somebody breaks into your home, what do you do? How do you protect yourself? How do you sleep at night? But after experiencing something like this, do you think would you be able to stay in that house? Dude, I think I'd have to move.
I would probably want to move, but I don't know that there's anywhere I could move to where I would still be able to sleep at night and rest in peace. This would be so psychologically disturbing. I don't know how you would recover mentally from this.
Yeah, this is the kind of trauma that is unexplainable, and nobody can really empathize with you unless you've been through it. And it is a small number of people relatively to the area that he had broken into their homes. And that wasn't enough. When we get back from the break, we'll talk about how the East Area Rapist started exercising his power and psychological torture over the public. 9 months after the first break-in of the East Area Rapist, the Sacramento police received a phone call from a man that claimed to be this individual. He told the police, "I'm the one that's been breaking into homes and raping women." And then he said, "I have my next victim already stalked, and you guys can't catch me." This is similar to what we saw with the Zodiac, and there are other killers that have done this type of taunting as well. Do we see that anywhere anymore? Is it just a matter of tracking that we don't see killers or serial criminals taunting the police as much?
Yeah, I mean, nowadays I think it's a lot easier to track and detect who's calling, but back then it was near impossible, and he seemed to just really enjoy doing that.
I feel like you and I were growing up when you first got the ability to have caller ID at your home, or type in star 69 and it would give you the number of the person that called.
Yeah. But you could also, as a caller, dial star 67 and that would hide your identity. But dude, I remember when we got the ability to have, the caller ID, which was like a separate box that your phone line plugged into, and then it would tell you who was calling. That was like revolutionary.
It was like you were, I don't know, an astronaut or something, all this technology in your house. But at this time, like you said, it was so hard to trace calls and trace people. And we saw all these criminals taunting the police, but also putting fear into the public through these phone calls. The same day that he called the Sacramento police for the first time, March 18th, 1977, the 15th attack of the East Area Rapist took place. He continued calling police, calling previous victims to threaten to kill them, calling future victims to get their schedules, just calling women that he had previously violated and screaming profanities at them. He continued these phone calls all the way up until 2001, which is probably when it became really easy to track things. But I mean, all of these crimes going back 24 years, and he's still exercising this power and inflicting this trauma on the victims.
I just told you that, had my home been broken into and I was tied up and forced to lay in a room with plates on my back while my wife gets brutally raped, I'm never going to recover from that. Could you imagine for 25 years afterwards, my wife receiving these kinds of phone calls? Like, it's bad enough. It's never going to go away anyway. But then every so often you have to pick up the phone and hear this psychopath again, knowing that he's still out there.
Reopening the wounds. And I don't want to seem argumentative, but it's like they never fully close. Yeah, no, you're right. It's torture. It's absolute torture.
For years. It's insane. Well, then, as if this story couldn't get worse, the East Area Rapist would eventually escalate to murder. On February 2nd, 1978, there was a couple who were walking their dog in Rancho Cordova. And there was a 21-year-old military policeman named Brian Maggiore. I don't know Jamie, how would you say Brian's last name?
Yeah, Major. Something like that, yeah.
So Brian and his 20-year-old wife, Katie Lee Major, had no idea that they were in the area where the East Area Rapist attacks were happening. So the couple got into somewhat of a confrontation with a man who was in the street, but then the man chased them down and shot them. So investigators believed that they were murdered by the East Area Rapist because when they came to investigate the scene, they found pre-tied shoelaces near Brian's body.
Yeah, and that's a calling card of the East Area Rapist, right? This is something that he always had with him and one of his favorite tools to incapacitate, especially the men in the home. On December 30th of 1979, orthopedic surgeon Dr. Robert Hoffman and his new girlfriend, clinical psychologist Dr. Deborah Alexandria Manning, were found shot to death in Robert's condo in Goleta, California. Robert was 44 and Deborah was 35. In this attack, Deborah had also been raped, and 2 of her rings were found hidden between the mattress and the bed frame, which again is just another psychological jab that this individual is doing. So we have gone from the ransacker breaking in and just messing your house up and taking meaningful things. The East Area Rapist breaks into homes, ties you up, and then will rape the woman, act like he lives in the house, and steal some stuff. Now we're seeing people murdered. And this guy at this attack in December of 1979, he went into the refrigerator and ate some leftover Christmas turkey, and then went and broke into the condo next door and stole a bicycle to leave. John, this is such a slow burn of escalation. Again, assuming this is all the same person, which I don't think anybody had put together back then.
On March 13th, 1980, interior designer Charlene Smith and attorney Lyman Smith were found murdered in their home in Ventura. And dude, it was gruesome. I mean, I don't think that there's a fictional movie out there that could depict such a gruesome scene. So the killer took a log from the pile of wood out back and then used it to bludgeon these two people to death. Lyman was 43. Charlene was just 33 years old. And Charlene was also raped. What makes this one awful I mean, this is already brutal, but what makes it even more sick was this couple was found dead after 3 days by Lyman's 12-year-old son because he had come by the home to mow the yard. So the bedroom alarm clock was still going off, and they were found still tied up, and they were tied with a drapery cord.
Jeez. And again, this is the MO of the East Area Rapist, but these people have been found killed, and the escalation continues. And you're right, a child finding his dead parents is, I mean, beyond heartbreaking. And now we see him also moving from committing murder with a gun to being more intimate in his kill and bludgeoning them to death. So continued development, horrible, awful development and growth for a killer, maybe? I don't know. On August 19th of 1980, Keith Harrington and Patrice Harrington were found murdered in their home inside of a gated community east of Sacramento. Just like the others we've just mentioned, Patrice had been raped and had been beaten so badly that her face and skull were mostly crushed. There were marks on both of her wrists and ankles, suggesting that she had been tied up, but they didn't find any ligatures or any weapons at the house. The Harringtons had only been married for 3 months when they were killed. Patrice was a 27-year-old pediatric nurse, and Keith was a 24-year-old medical student at UC Irvine. He was set to graduate in just 4 months, and this is a young couple who seems to have just about everything going their way when this sick individual breaks into their home and ends their lives.
On February 6th, 1981, Manuela Withune was raped and murdered in her Irvine home. Her wrists and ankles showed that she had been tied up, but no ligatures or weapons were found at the home. She was married, but her husband was not home. She had just come back from visiting him because he was in the hospital. She was only 28 years old.
And again, we see this time and time again, and he's continuing to evolve and no longer leaving the weapons and ligatures. Now, he could have been trying to disguise that it was him, or maybe he's just trying to clean up after himself a little better and not leave as much evidence, but he is making changes once again. On July 27th of 1981, Sherry Domingo and Gregory Sanchez were attacked at Sherry's house in Goleta, which is really close to Robert Offerman's home, who we talked about earlier. Sherry had been living there temporarily while a relative was putting it up for sale. Some people believe that Gregory knew who he was dealing with, the man now being called the original Night Stalker, which we've covered a story about the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, before, but this person was also labeled the Night Stalker. So they think that Gregory tried to tackle the killer rather than be tied up. He didn't have any marks on his wrists, nothing to suggest he had been tied up, but he was shot. His head was covered by clothes the killer pulled from the closet. Sherry, like the others, was raped and bludgeoned to death. She had bruises on her wrists and ankles, but the restraints, once again, were no longer at the scene. So now we're seeing this third nickname come into play, the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, and now the Night Stalker, the original Night Stalker, as he was referred to in these early murders that he was committing in the 80s.
Then the original Night Stalker took a long hiatus. On May 4th, 1986, 5 years after his last attack, the killer raped and bludgeoned 18-year-old Janelle Lisa Cruz in Irvine. Her family was on vacation in Mexico when she was attacked. The house was for sale, and her body was discovered by a realtor who stopped by to show the house. Janelle was found beaten beyond recognition on her own bed. Her teeth were found in her lungs. Her teeth and some of her hair were both found in her lungs when they did an autopsy. I don't even want to begin to speculate on how in the heck that happened.
No.
Just, it had to have been something absolutely brutal. There was a pipe wrench that was missing from the home, and police believe that that was the murder weapon. This is, my God, what a brutal scene this had to be.
Let's talk a little bit about that in hiatus, because we've seen consistent escalation starting in 1976 into 1981, and that's when we see the last kill, and then there's a 5-year break. Looking back after we know who this person is, which we'll get into in part 2 next week, we believe that maybe he had kids, John. Do you think that's a lot of times when a killer stops killing, they move or they get arrested or they die or they have to go to military service? I think those are the big 4 that we look at, but he definitely starts killing again. Are there other reasons you can think of why he would have taken a break?
Well, I was thinking back to the previous case. This did not go smoothly, right? He was tackled by a man. And I don't know that in any of his other situations did any of the men fight back. So,
from my understanding, all the other men had ligature marks on their wrists.
Yeah. And then this guy has no marks. So did he get scared that he was close to being caught and things just didn't go the way he wanted them to? So he took a little bit of a break? Or
do you think that's enough to get somebody who's compelled to kill to fight? Can he fight that urge for that reason? Because I don't know, we talk about killers every week on this show pretty much, and so many times they are just driven to do this. I don't know what can counter that drive to get them to stop. And you're right. Maybe it was fear.
Maybe. I mean, I think back to BTK. He, by all accounts of his daughter, was a pretty decent dad.
Yep.
And he would save all of his shenanigans for when she was in bed, and then he would go out and do all the stuff he would do. So, man, I don't know. Like, you would think that if he's done all of this, what would prevent him from acting on his urges? And I don't know what that would be.
Yeah. And again, people speculate now that he had a daughter in 1982 and I think another one in 1986. So potentially those were stopping points for him along the way. Fast forward to 1997 in the Contra Costa County Investigator's Office, where Paul Holes found some old folders on the East Area Rapist and began to dive into the case. Now, he is not... the East Area Rapist, as far as they know, is no longer active. So this is officially a cold case. And the Night Stalker as well has stopped killing at this point. So they're looking at this as a cold case, and they're finally able to start using DNA. So Paul Holes was the first one to test this DNA, and he was able to link the East Area Rapist DNA to the original Night Stalker. And this is when the official link came between these two crime sprees of the same individual. Over the years, the crimes of the East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker were mostly forgotten in the media. And we also said Visalia Ransacker. So we know that was him as well. But this was, these were more violent crimes, and they were a big deal. In 2001, they linked these two together, and it was largely forgotten about. People didn't make any headway on it or figure out whose DNA this was. And that's when a woman named Michelle McNamara started a blog. Remember blogs, John? Blogs are still a thing, right? It's basically just your personal storytelling website. You write about whatever you want. Michelle was fascinated by high profile and unsolved murder cases, and there still continue to be so many of those. In 2006, she started the blog True Crime Diary to blog about her investigations into cold cases. And in 2011, she wrote her first blog post about the East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker. She became obsessed with this case, and she's the one that gave him the moniker because he had done all these different crimes, combining the two into the name of the Golden State Killer. And it was really Michelle's work that got the ball rolling on the investigation that led to this arrest. And we'll get into that next week. And Michelle's story in and of itself is fascinating and encouraging and heartbreaking and all those things. But I don't know, John, we podcast, we talk about crimes all the time. There have been media coverage that has led to crimes being solved. I think this is the perfect example of somebody sitting down and having the time, dedicating the time to focus on something and putting all the pieces together.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk more about what all she knew in next week's episode, but I mean, she basically became a mom who had a side hustle of being a detective. I mean, she really worked hard, and she had this was just a hobby to her. She just wanted to see this person brought to light. An
early internet sleuth, I believe. She started writing a book on this, and that's kind of what the basis of the investigation. But we will be back next week to talk about Michelle McNamara's investigation and how we found out that the Night Stalker was actually a guy named Joseph James DeAngelo.
Guys, we appreciate you sticking around and listening to this episode. And please come back next week because we'll have everything wrapped up for you and let you know how we now know his name.
Yeah, this is we're continuing to solve cases in this manner. And this is a newer type of usage of technology to solve cases. And I think this case proves that we can go back and find information on the coldest of cases. We really appreciate you guys. And like John said, we will be back next week. We're continuing to push out those bonus episodes. Go follow us on TikTok. We do a lot of updates over there between Sarah Boone, the Menendez brothers, the Delphi murders, so much going on in the crime world. And we do daily updates on TikTok at True Crimecast. Check us out over there.
Until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.